Hey Weiss fans, Kudou here. I get a few criticisms on some of my Weiss videos that I think it would be beneficial for the channel if I go through some of them every once in a while and explain my reasoning for why I teach some of the things that I do. So for this video, I went ahead and I took 10 of the criticisms that I see probably need the most address, and I'll go ahead and talk about them, talk about my reasonings behind why I teach a certain way or why I teach a certain thing. I'd like to state a quick disclaimer though right here. I'm not saying that any of these are necessarily wrong. I don't think that you can really play a card game the wrong way as long as you're enjoying yourself, and some tricks just don't work for them. Sometimes people just play one specific way that works for them, and if they try to deviate from that, then it just stops working. So I completely understand if these people don't learn really anything from my videos because maybe I just play in such a different way from people who go to tournaments or people who consider themselves pros. So I'm not trying to say that any of these people are wrong. I'm just saying that their opinion is a bit different from mine, and I want to kind of explain a little bit as to why I believe they're so different. I would beg to differ on the points where it is implied that Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering are just let's see whose cards are stronger kind of game. Both Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic actually do have a fair share of thinking involved. My point wasn't that Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic don't take as much thought. They are incredibly complicated and require a ton of strategy. My point was Weiss has a different focus on power. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, if you have a 2500 and your opponent has a 3000, you cannot attack without the use of other cards that boost your power. Same with Magic, as your 2-2 will be defeated by a 3-3. Weiss not only gives you the option to side attack and forego battle altogether, but also Encore, which lets your character live through an attack without using a card that specifically says they get saved. I am not saying Weiss needs more strategy than other card games, I'm only saying that it is a different game and requires a different mindset. I disagree to a big extent that players should follow the level 0 hoarding for early game. It is very risky, and you will be keeping unnecessary level 0s in your hand. By the time you actually want to play them, you will be level 1 already. Zero hoarding is something I stand by for beginners. Thanks to the mechanics of the game, keeping level 0s at the beginning of the game is never not beneficial. At level 0, you can play them for field advantage, and at levels 1, 2, and 3, you can clock them without having to clock your more appropriate cards. I also stated that you should learn with zero hoarding and move up to perfect hand strategy because it is more viable, but only after you understand the limits of your deck. The part where you mentioned the pros and cons of level 0 hoarding had very wrong points. The first point you mentioned, lots of stock, only applies if you rush at level 0, which is highly unadvisable. Having a full field means gaining 3 stock each turn. This is what I was trying to get across. I do not approve of recklessly throwing away cards, but you should aim for having 3 front row characters whenever possible. I realize this will not always be possible, but you should aim for it nonetheless. Having a lot of level 0s in hand does not mean that you will have good field control and will waste opponent's hand. It is by having good level 0 beatdowns that will help you gain field control, so it is really the choice of what level 0 attackers you choose to play in your deck that determine whether you can control the 0 field. I felt I did not need to explain that you should believe in your level 0 lineup. No one purposely puts bad cards in their deck at any level. Duelists also realize that any non-beater cards in their deck serve some other purpose, like tech, and understand they will be more easily reversed. In this way, I do feel like having more 0s in your hand can lead to better field control, because the more options you have, the better option you can make for the current situation. Destroying your opponent's characters does not mean they have no stock. You may say that it can lower your opponent's hand size and deter them from playing characters so that he will gain less stock. Destroying your opponent's characters doesn't mean they lose stock directly. That is true. However, by putting your opponent in a position where they cannot play with a full field, you can control how much stock they can potentially have. If you wipe the opponent's field and they play 2 characters on their next turn, they will gain 2 stock that turn. If you cannot wipe their field and they have 3 characters in play, then they do not have to spend the 2 cards in their hand replacing their field, and they also get 3 stock instead of 2 for the turn. This is why I believe you should aim to destroy your opponent's characters. For the pros and cons of Perfect Hand strategy. I disagree that the level 0s are left to chance. Honestly, most of the time you only need 2 attackers and 1 support to carry you in level 0. If your time at level 0 prolongs, you probably will get them through your pools since you'll be drawing 3 cards per turn. 1 draw and draw 2 more later because of clock. It is true that you can be just fine with 2 front row and 1 back row actor. However, if your hand has no 0 cards when you open, it can lead to a huge disadvantage. The fewer cards you throw away, the lower your chances of getting a 0 and standing a chance. It isn't a huge problem to keep 2 cards and only ditch 3. It was a possible problem with the potential to hurt you. For the third video, I think you should also have stated that there is a stand phase before the draw phase. I concede here. I should remind everyone to stand all of your in-play actors before you draw your card. Do not draw and then stand. It is a really bad habit. For the scenarios in which you should be clocking, the first point actually can start as early as late level 2, where drawing is not your priority but surviving the game is. As I've stated before, my videos are simply a guideline. It's like refining clay that is up to the viewers to mold. I believe anyone who learns from these videos should get in the habit of clocking all the time, and if they find they are dying too quickly, then they can change their playstyle. I personally clock pretty much whenever possible, and it is successful for me, so that is what I teach. If anyone tries this method and finds they do not have success with it themselves, I urge you to change it. Whether you clock or not could be decided by other factors, like both you and your opponent's level and opponent's hand size. If you don't have 6 hand size at the end of each turn when you're level 0 or 1, I suggest that you better start clocking. But anyway, following the exact same scenario in the vid, it is alright not to be able to down your opponent's cards. I'd rather be focusing on having a strong hand until my later game. If you had 3 hand and played everything down to beat your opponent for that turn, he may just bring out something stronger since you just dealt damage to him and he may have leveled. And even if you didn't level him, he may just pull a Climax that boost his character's power next turn. You just played the 3 cards in your hand in the previous turn, you have no counters and no hand to bluff your opponent into thinking you have one. Firstly, I acknowledge that the situation will sometimes cause you to play differently. Unfortunately, I cannot teach based on every possible scenario as it would be infinite. I urge viewers to change their playstyle based on what works for you and what doesn't. As for the scenario, that is highly unlikely to happen in the first place. It was a visual aid to get the point I was trying to make across, which was that if you clock a card you need for the turn, you run the risk of not drawing something as good. A point I still stand by, might I add. As for the scenario where your opponent then plays 3 cards that wipes your field and you have nothing to bluff with, I do not like the idea of not making the best possible play so you can bluff by having cards in your hand. Teaching based on hypotheticals just isn't my style. If your best possible play for the turn requires playing your entire hand, I believe you should do it anyway. You do not know for sure if your opponent can or cannot derail you afterwards, but you do know what you can do in the moment. This is why I do not like dealing in hypotheticals. As for what to clock, it is quite subjective, but I rather prioritize using the most useless to least useless hand arrangement rather than tossing your level 3s before level 2. There might be cards that are even more useless than your level 3s. Strange. I feel as though I addressed this already. In general, I believe before level 2 you should ditch level 3s. However, I also know that sometimes there is a more useless card in your hand to get rid of. Again, this comes from understanding your deck and knowing what is actually considered useless at what time. It is not something that I can generally teach you. I disagree on the point that you should clock climaxes and let them eventually go to the waiting room. You should see the situation. Honestly, if I don't see a chance of the climax going from clock to waiting room before my next refresh, I might as well play it. I wasn't saying that climaxes should always be clocked. To the contrary, I said you should not be afraid to clock a climax if the rest of your hand is far too good to clock a different card. Checking the situation is a given and should not have to be explained. It is not always good to go first most of the time. You forcibly have to play the first card and risk it being reversed by some level 0 beatdown. It is always good to go first for that very reason. In a way, you want your opponent to beat down your first drop with a beatdown card. You want to see the pinnacle of what your opponent's opening hand is capable of. If they play a beater card to step over your first character, you know they have a beater and what its power is and whether or not you can deal with it. You also see what their other two spaces are doing. If they fill their field, you can hand pick which ones you can reverse on your turn. Even better, if they do not play something that reverses your first character, you can use its power to your advantage. You get more information and your opponent gets less. That is much better in my opinion. I think that about wraps it up for Kudou's very first Q&A. Remember, if you've got any questions, do not hesitate to ask. No question is a dumb question unless it's a dumb question. And I think that's about it. I'll catch you later, YouTube.